It's March 8th. Spring is about halfway done, and we still don't know who the final two starters in the Pirates rotation will be.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is Ethan Smith, your host of this wonderful show here on the Locked On Podcast Network. You can follow me on Twitter right there at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And as mentioned, it's March 8th. Spring training is in full swing, and it's about halfway done. And the Pirates still have a ton of questions about the back end of their rotation. Before we get into that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet at FanDuel.com/locked-on. So make sure you go check that out today. And going into the offseason, and now, of course, 2024, we all knew the focus of this Pirates roster and potentially their success was going to be determined by starting pitching. In the offseason, obviously, we've talked about it a lot, about the acquisitions that the Pirates have made. They went out and acquired Martin Perez. They get Marco Gonzalez, and that was all great. But obviously that all happened after Johan Oviedo was announced that he was going to be on the shelf for the entirety of the 2024 season after having Tommy John surgery. So that just created more questions that still remain about the final two rotation spots as opening day looms. You look at it and you say, well, if Johan Oviedo was healthy, things would be a lot different. You'd be thinking about this a lot differently. But opening day looms, and the Pirates still have questions about the back end of their rotation. And you look at the rotation right now, it has three definitive guys. You look at Mitch Keller, you look at Martin Perez, you look at Marco Gonzalez. But really after that, there is a long list of non-roster invitees and bounce-back candidates and prospects that will look to break the roster over the next 20 days. I mean, this conversation, we've had it plenty of times, folks. If you've been on the show, we've had it plenty of times. It's usually dominated by the youthful trio of Roansy Contreras, Quinn Priester, and Luis Ortiz. And you look at those guys, and they've each shown signs of improvements, especially with the velocity this spring. But we still don't really know what those guys are going to be. We don't know if what we've seen in spring training is going to translate over to the regular season. And that's a very big deal when you're talking about Roansy Contreras, Quinn Priester, and Luis Ortiz. We've even seen Jared Jones, a guy that a lot of people, including myself, have loathed over this spring with his prowess right now as far as his velocity goes and his command on his pitches goes. And he's the Pirates' third-ranked prospect. Of course, he's going to have a lot of hype surrounded around him, and he flashes a lot, again, with the elite velocity tools and command, but questions still remain with him as well as far as what his secondary pitches will be, the changeup that I mention to you guys all the time. But, you know, that moves you again to another tier of pitchers that I'd like to highlight some more today, seeing as this spring battle is vital to what the rotation could look like come opening day. And it's something that I find very interesting. It's something that when you look at it and break it down, you say, hey, there's a lot of guys here that the Pirates just have not had this much behind their MLB staff in a very long time. Now, albeit there are question marks surrounding most of these guys, but at the end of the day, when you break it down and you say, okay, we can see that these guys could at least be spot starters, or they could come in when somebody gets injured and it's not going to be a massive drop-off. And that's what I think you're looking at with guys like this. And right now, you look at Fangraphs and what they say. Right now, the final two spots are being given to Luis Ortiz and Jared Jones. And I would be fine with that if that's the case of what they want to do, but plenty can change between now and opening day. Fangraphs also features Roansy Contreras, Josh Fleming, and Bailey Falter as bullpen pieces. That's something that I will kind of talk about here in a little bit, that I think would actually not be the worst thing in the world to have some of these guys in the bullpen so that you could still get looks at them at the big league level while also getting looks at the other guys that are in the rotation. And I think with the bullpen too, if Dauri Moreta is going to miss some time with that injury, I think it would behoove the Pirates to not have one of those guys in there that they want to get looks at, because you're looking at a lot of these guys that have upside. And that's where a lot of these pitchers are. A lot of these guys are young and have upside. But then you move to another tier of pitchers that are going to likely be at AAA and could be potential depth options. I always struggle to say that word. But you move to that tier and you find a ton of names that should offer that at worst, like recently acquired Eric Lauer, Chase Anderson, and Willie Peralta. Those are guys that I think could come in and start for 2 or 3 starts if needed, if the Pirates desperately needed it that badly. But then you move to another group of young pitchers in Kyle Nicholas, Jackson Wolf, Braxton Ashcraft, and of course Paul Skeens, who I think all could see some action in the starting rotation or the bullpen this year at some point. So with all these names, I mean, you come to around 12 to maybe even 13 pitchers vying for those 2 final rotation spots. And usually on an MLB roster, you're only carrying 13 pitchers at maximum, along with 13 position players. So you practically have a full AA rotation already. So it's a loaded battle for sure. And general manager Ben Cherington spoke with Alex Stump of MLB.com the other day and said that 7 to 8 pitchers are involved for these final 2 spots. And that's something that you look at and say, hey, again, not exactly something that is crazy, but it's still a lot. And you never, and I mean never, are going to hear a general manager of any baseball team ever complain about having too many pitchers. That is never going to be an issue. Now, I'm not saying that the guys behind Keller, Perez, and Gonzalez are valuable depth, but they're not the worst. And this is something that the Pirates have not really had for a very long time. And when you look at who has the edge right now, I think you have to look at the youth of what this team has. And I think that's where you give the edge, is you're going to give the edge to the Luis Ortizes and the Quinn Priesters and the Roansy Contreras and the Jared Joneses and the Paul Skeens of the world, and even the Braxton Ashcrafts, Kyle Nicholas, and Jackson Wolfs of the world. Because when you look at it under the microscope of what the Pirates are trying to do, they want to get looks at these guys to see what they have. And you have to get that idea of what you have before that next wave eventually comes of Xander Muth and Thomas Harrington and Bubba Chandler and Anthony Solometto. There's a lot of waves of pitching being built in the system right now. So when you shorten it down to the young guys, you're looking at Contreras, Priester, Ortiz, Jones, Nicholas, and Ashcraft. I'm excluding Skeens. But you look at all those guys, and they have upside. They have plenty of development to achieve, but they do have the highest upside of the group of the NRIs, of everyone mentioned, of course, thus far outside of Skeens. Now, if it were up to me, I'd say at this current moment, I would roll with Luis Ortiz and Roansy Contreras, seeing as it appears they have caught some of that velocity uptick that we were all talking about all season this spring. And each of them has the most experience of the group. You look at Ashcraft and Nicholas and Jackson Wolf, and those guys combined have maybe played 10 games and had 10 appearances. Roansy and Ortiz have been at the big league level for at least a decent amount enough time to where you can make that argument. I've spoken about Jared Jones as well, having a shot at the opening day roster, but truly, I want him to start in AAA and come up relatively quickly afterwards to get his feet wet. And I think that's something that the Pirates want to do with Jared Jones. Now, if Jared Jones does make the opening day roster, I'm not going to be mad about it, but I'm also not going to act like I'm not going to be worried a little bit about that changeup at the big league level. And if his slider and fastball combination just doesn't translate, which is something you always have to worry about. And then as far as Priester, Nicholas, and Ashcraft go, I think you start those guys in AAA and use them sporadically through the season. I think that makes sense. I think those are guys that can play well at AAA, come up, you get good looks at them, they have options, and they're all on the 40-man, so why not? You can bring them up without having to really do all that much roster gymnastics. But what's most important here is that the Pirates have plenty of pitching options right now, albeit, again, question mark options, but at least options with relative upside. Now, obviously, my official prediction show later this month will paint a broader picture of how I think the rotation shapes out. But for now, as of March 8th, I would roll with Luis Ortiz and Roansy Contreras as your last two guys. I wouldn't even be opposed with a six-man rotation to keep Mitch Keller, Martin Perez, and Marco Gonzalez healthy and fresh. I wouldn't be mad about that at all. Now, obviously, that takes away from having Mitch Keller on the mound more often than not, which isn't a good thing. But I would rather keep Mitch Keller healthy than burn his arm out. The same thing with Perez and Gonzalez. Now, I also wouldn't be shocked if 3, maybe even 4 of these guys are on the 26-man roster with 2 in the rotation and 2 in the bullpen. I think that's something you could easily see. But with 20 days left in spring, the decision looms for general manager Ben Cherington and manager Derek Shelton to figure out what they're going to do with the back end of the rotation. And they have options to look at with only 20 days to figure it out. We're going to continue the Know Your Enemy series, going over to Illinois to look at the Chicago Cubs, a team that has been a thorn in the Pirates side for quite a while. We're going to talk about the Cubs offseason, what they have to offer, and how the Pirates could be competitive against the Cubbies this season. But before we do that, folks, we are going to talk about Factor Meals. It can be hard sometimes, especially when you work a lot, to really prepare yourself a good meal. But that's where Factor comes in, because Factor Meals is here, because eating better is easy. With Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals, every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian approved, and ready to go in just 2 minutes. You'll have over 35 different options to choose from every week, including Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Also, there are more than 60 add-ons to help you stay fueled and feeling good all day long. So what are you waiting for? Get started today and get after your goals. You can fuel up fast with Factor's restaurant quality meals that are ready to heat and eat wherever you are. And there's no prep and no mess. Factor meals are ready to heat and eat, so there's no prepping, cooking, or cleanup needed. Sign up and save. We've done the math. Factor is less expensive than takeout, and every meal is dietitian approved to be nutritious and delicious. So head to factormeals.com/LockedOnMLB50 and use code LockedOnMLB50 to get 50% off at Factor Meals. That's code LockedOnMLB50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnMLB50 to get 50% off and eat better and less messy today. And folks, also don't forget that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. So find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app and, of course, YouTube. And welcome back, of course, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every day. Thank you, as always, for tuning into this show, as you always do, on all of your audio platforms, as well as YouTube. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, please do so. Turn on the notification bell on wherever you listen so you always get the most up-to-date episodes of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And again, today we are continuing the Know Your Enemy mini-series, where we're doing a segment yesterday where we talked about the Cincinnati Reds. Today we're talking about the Chicago Cubs. Tuesday we'll talk about the Milwaukee Brewers, and Wednesday we'll talk about the St. Louis Cardinals, because it's always good to know about your division rivals and what they're up to, considering they're the most direct competition to the Pittsburgh Pirates, being a competitive baseball team for the first time in a decade. And on yesterday's show, we began taking a look at the other NL Central teams, starting with Cincinnati, who I think could be successful this year, and the team that pales the most comparisons to the Pirates heading into 2024. But now we move to Chicago to take a look at the Chicago Cubs, who some believe to be the front runners of the NL Central this year. And really, the offseason for the Chicago Cubs was dominated by what Cody Bellinger was going to decide to do and his budding decision. And ultimately, he returned to Chicago after not garnering the financial payday that he desired. Scott Boras kind of dropping the ball on that one a little bit. Bellinger did come off a pretty good 2023. He hit 307 with 26 homers and a 134 WRC plus. So a return to Chicago always made sense for him, and he immediately slots back in at first base. Now, as his decision took pretty much all offseason, though, another offseason move quickly became the biggest talk of not only Chicago, but pretty much the entire division, because manager Craig Counsell swapped places in the Central this offseason, departing, of course, from the Milwaukee Brewers and heading to the Chicago Cubs after the departure of David Ross. Counsell did, of course, a fine job in Milwaukee in his tenure since 2014. He got the most out of those teams, really. I mean, you look at those Brewers teams that he was working with, and man, he was doing some good things with those teams. And those Brewers teams, of course, held a .531 win percentage over his time from 2014 to last year. He even reached the National League Championship Series in 2018. And it really created a shockwave through the division. I mean, you look at Chicago acquiring a fine manager and Craig Counsell. Milwaukee started to scramble as a retool was imminent. Or is imminent, and you saw it already with Corbin Burns, but we'll talk about that more on Tuesday. And when you look at the Chicago team, it is interesting because, I mean, there's a lot to look at with this team. It's not a bad team by any means, but they didn't really do anything this offseason, in my opinion, to really get better, and they didn't really get all that worse either. I mean, obviously adding Craig Counsell changes the dynamic a lot, but you look at mainstays like Nico Horner, Dansby Swanson, Ian Happ, Seiya Suzuki. Those guys all remain and highlight the top end of the lineup. Ian Happ, of course, Pittsburgh native, who I've always wanted to come play in Pittsburgh because he always destroys the Pirates. But then you also introduce newcomers like Michael Busch, Garrett Cooper, those guys that will look to make impacts as well. But if we're looking at this Cubs lineup and the players that scare me the most, you might think, well, it could be Swanson, it could be Happ, it could be Bellinger, Justin Steele even. But of all the Cubs players in the starting lineup that scare me the most, I think you have to look at Christopher Morel, who was a breakout candidate last year, likely even more so this year. And I mean, you look at what he did last year. He burst onto the scene with 26 home runs and a 1.4 WAR. His power is only going to get better. He's 24 years old. This kid's going to be good. And as far as pitching goes, I mean, the Cubs lost Marcus Stroman to the Yankees via free agency, but they quickly replaced him with Japanese product Shoto Imanaga, who even the Pirates appeared to be interested in at one point. But Imanaga will, of course, join a rotation of Justin Steele, Jamison Taillon, Kyle Hendricks, and Jordan Wicks. Obviously, you still look at other options that they have potentially in the rotation as well, but not exactly the strongest group, but also not the weakest group. And the bullpen will continue to be headed by closer Adbert Alzolay, Julian Merriweather, and of course, free agent signing Hector Neris will be great supplemental pieces to what Alzolay, who I believe had 26 saves last year, will do in that department. You look at top prospects like Pete Crow Armstrong and Hayden Wesneski, who could also debut this year. So you're looking at a team that has a lot of talent, and it makes sense to say that they are the front runner to win this division. You look at the Cardinals. Are they really going to turn everything around with all the offseason moves they made? You look at the Cincinnati Reds. Yeah, they had a great year last year, got a little bit better, but do those young guys have the same kind of season they had last year? Milwaukee seems to be in a retool. And then, of course, the Pittsburgh Pirates, a lot of question marks with us over here in Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh was 3-10 versus Chicago last year. So obviously you'd like to see an improvement against the Cubs for Pittsburgh, because I think that would just be huge for them in 2024. Pittsburgh is 126 and 173 against Chicago since 1995. So bucking that trend again could be huge for Pittsburgh and their competitiveness. And you look at their FanDuel over under, it sits at 84.5. And for 84.5 is such a sneaky number by FanDuel. And it's a number that I feel is a stay away if you're betting on over-unders at win totals for the MLB season. And it really just, it boils down to the fact that I could really see the winner of this division winning 84 games. And when you look at Chicago, they didn't really get any better and they didn't really get any worse. So you could see a world where Chicago wins 86 games. You could see a world where they win 84. You could see a world where they win 80. So it's a tough over-under for me on Chicago's win total at 84.5. But Pittsburgh will, of course, face Chicago for the first time in 2024 on May 10th. So we'll see how the Pirates fare against their Illinois rivals this season. And I think that they really, if they could compete against the Chicago Cubs team well this year, that would go a long way in keeping this team competitive throughout 2024. As you know, to all my loyal listeners, the third segment will be spring news and notes. So we're going to get into those here in just a moment, folks. But before we do that, we're going to talk about Amazon Fire TV. As you heard earlier, Locked On launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, but it's also now available on Amazon Fire TV, which should be your sports destination. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV, because Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experience with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live television. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep you up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, March Madness, NBA, Major League Baseball, and lots more. Not to mention, you also get great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. You get all of it at Amazon Fire TV. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. And if you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV to learn more. It's March 8th, which means we're about 20 days away from opening day in Miami. The Pirates signed, of course, left-hander Eric Lauer to a minor league deal yesterday, adding to the slew of pitchers that they already have available at their disposal. Eric Lauer, of course, who turns 29 in the middle of the season this year, did not have the greatest 2023, but much like we've seen with the trend of a lot of the guys that the Pirates have went after this offseason, he had a sub-3.7 ERA the year prior, and 2021 with Milwaukee. Obviously, 2020 was not a good year really for any pitchers for the most part, and Lauer did not have a great 2020, but you do look at having that sub-3.7 ERA in 2021 and 2022 could offer a little bit of optimism with Eric Lauer. His offerings also saw a step back last year. You look at the velocity taking a dip. Usually he sits in the 92, 93 area. He was around 90.5 to 90.8 last year, and his command was just not really all that great. He didn't even really have a lot of success in the minors last year, but he also dealt with nagging shoulder and elbow issues. So it'll be interesting to see how he performs when he is eventually healthy. And Pittsburgh also announced a few days ago a unique promotion: no fees, just baseball, a promotion that features no fees on tickets to PNC Park. It does end this Sunday. You will not see me again until Monday, so I wanted to inform you guys about this if you didn't hear about it. And the promotion includes individual tickets, theme nights, group offerings, and all promotion games as well. Now, again, that promotion does end on Sunday, March 10th, so make sure, if you plan to go to PNC Park this year and don't want to pay those pesky extra fees, get online and get some tickets over there. As far as the on-field goes, the Pirates are split squad today against Minnesota and Atlanta, both in progress at the time of recording. We also spoke about the spring breakout roster on yesterday's show, so I'm sure from now until that Thursday that we'll get further news and updates as the week progresses about pitching assignments and lineups. As mentioned in the first segment, too, the battle for the final two rotation spots will surely be highlighted over the final weeks of spring, while the battles at second base that feature Peguero, Triolo, Bay, Gonzalez, and of course right field with Palacios, Connor Joe, and Edward Olivares. I think those battles are going to continue to ramp up, and we'll get a clearer idea of what the Pirates decide to do over there at those positions. And as spring continues, I think we'll also see the action on the field pick up as teams ramp up for regular season action. You usually see that usually entering this upcoming week or the week after, where you start seeing guys put a little more effort out there, kind of getting out of the warming up idea of it and getting into regular season action, which is always fun to see. It's always enjoyable to see these guys go at it. We also will likely see longer outings from pitchers on the cusp, which the Pirates have tons of, and we talked about in that first segment, seeing as the time is now to get valuable looks at them when the games don't count. And truthfully, I'm also just excited to see the continued success of top stars like O'Neal Cruz, Key Brian Hayes, Brian Reynolds, Henry Davis, etc. as spring concludes, seeing as that group and others will be the biggest contributors to the squad this season. And we'll continue to take looks at the happenings in Bradenton and more on Locked On Pirates. And we're going to end this show today talking about the excitement for 2024, what we have planned here on this show, and a bunch of other things. And I think you guys have really, really helped me build a fun platform on this show. It's been a blast to have you guys on board with this. I mean, when I started, this was audio only, and it was something that really didn't have much of a following yet. And over the past 3, going into my 4th season covering this team now, you guys comment every day. You give me valuable insight on what I can improve on. You continually give me your opinions about the Pittsburgh Pirates. You give me ideas for segments. Obviously, remember that this 3rd segment will go away from spring news and notes into something else when the season starts. And you guys ultimately tune in every day. And that's the whole point of the Locked On Podcast Network and the Locked On Pirates podcast, is for you to tune in and get valuable insight on this baseball team every single day that you tune in. And that's what I am so valuable and so happy to bring you every single day. And I could not thank you guys more than and I sit down in front of this computer with this microphone every single day and talk to you guys about this team. And yeah, it almost feels as if I'm talking to myself, because I quite literally am. I'm sitting in my house by myself, looking at a computer and a camera, talking to myself. But honestly, you guys have built up such a relationship with me that I do really think that we've built something great on this show. I think it's only going to continue to get better. I think it's something that throughout the rest of spring, we're going to be covering stuff. Once the regular season gets here, it's going to be awesome. I'm going to be in Pittsburgh April 5th and hope to plan to meet you guys finally, because I was in Pittsburgh at one point when I was doing this show, but I wasn't as popular as I am now. But you guys are awesome. Thank you for always tuning into this show. Again, always make sure you follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. You can find this show on YouTube and all of your audio platforms, because it is free and available to all of you here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. Again, you guys mean more to me than you think. And I love that I'm able to tell you guys that on this platform. You guys are awesome. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday evening. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And I'll see you with Gary Morgan on Monday. But until then, see you on the flip side.